Welcome along to Matchday Live, your Leeds Rhinos game day preview show as the Rhinos head over to Huddersfield Giants in round 8 of the Betfred Super League. Tonight it's going to be a huge all-Yorkshire clash that we cannot wait for, and we're here to get you ready for when the teams kick off. My name's Dan Hawkhead, a pleasure to have your company. As always, I'm joined by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. As always, Jack, the Rhinos in red-hot form. We're coming off the back of a great week off after the Cup. What do you expect from tonight's huge clash against a very resurgent Huddersfield Giants side?
Very much so, yeah. I think it's a really interesting matchup, made the more intriguing by Huddersfield's upturning form. I think we've seen a different Huddersfield side in their last two games that really surprised win over Wigan, and then backing that up the week after as they did as well. I think that they're a really good-looking side now, Huddersfield. They look like they've got a bit of an identity about them. Absolutely. And I think that is very much what makes this quite an intriguing, interesting game to look ahead to. I think if you look at the start of the season, the way Huddersfield started, you'd probably be banking on the Rhinos without a doubt, whereas now I think it's a bit more of an even contest. So, yeah, it's not going to be a straightforward game for Leeds by any means, I don't think, especially given that confidence that Huddersfield have now got. I mean, you look at the squad that they've been able to name, not just for this game, but also in those last two matches, they've got bodies back. And all of a sudden, they are looking like a formidable outfit with a fair bit about them. So I think it's a really interesting game to look ahead to.
It must be a really strange one from someone who also covers Huddersfield as part of your guys' coverage for Radio Leeds, that you almost look at it as a season of two halves already. You've had the sort of Luke Robinson started a continuation of his era off the back of a tough year last year. And now you've got the Liam Finn era, which has come with more players coming back. It's almost chalk and cheese, isn't it, looking at, like you say, where the Giants were in terms of not being able to find points, sort of getting that one win against Hunslet in the Cup, but that's kind of a given when you're a Super League side against a Championship outfit. And then going on to then getting your likes of Clune, and we'll come on to these guys, but your Clunes, your Evalds, your real pivotal playmakers back. It's an almost brand new team. It must be really bizarre, but good for being, I guess, a Giants supporter, a Giants fan, that your team's having that sort of uptake, I guess.
And let's not forget as well, they're still in this sort of period of unknown. They're in the process of finding a new head coach and appointing a new head coach. That's still an ongoing thing. So they're still in the midst of that uncertainty, yet do seem to have a bit more about them now. I'm not going to say that's down to Luke Robinson leaving. I think it's very much more so down to getting the players back. It was quite ironic that first game that they won against Wigan was the first time in, I think, around 18 months where they've been able to name their first choice spine, the 1, the 6, the 7, and the 9 all at once. It was the first time in so long they've been able to do that, just such has been the injury crisis that they have gone through in the past couple of years or so. And Liam Finn after that game said as much. He was like, it's been a bittersweet week because they got the win against Wigan, but it was clouded by the fact that Luke Robinson had lost his job, and he is someone that is still, even though he's no longer at the club, he is still thought of so highly by everyone that's there, not least the players and the staff, because of the service that he gave to them, both as a player and as a coach as well. Not just head coach, but through the coaching ranks as well, working with the younger players as an assistant for a while too. So, it was a real sort of unfortunate shame, the timing of those two events, of him leaving and then of them suddenly getting back this key group of players. But I remember I did the Wigan game for BBC Radio Leeds, and before that it was myself and Phil Vivers, and we were sort of chatting about what we really expected, and I don't think either of us really had too much hope for Huddersfield, even though they had named, even though they had these players back, they had Clune back, they had Evalds back, they'd named a stronger side, because previously they'd just not looked like a team that had any particular identity or had a bite about them. They'd go into a game and you'd almost expect this same Huddersfield side that has been playing games for the past year or so, where they might show up for 20 minutes of an 80-minute match, and that would be it. They'd show a bit of promise, but then just wouldn't be able to sustain it whatsoever. And coming up against a Wigan side who at the time were unbeaten, full stop. They were on that winning run from the beginning of 2026. You were thinking, right, it's going to be a bit of a hide in this for Huddersfield.
On the road as well, like the Brick Community Stadium is no easy place to go.
Exactly, on the road over in Lancashire. It was a damp afternoon as well, and but they completely stunned everyone, and that was from minute one. You felt this intensity about them from those opening stages. They got I think it took them around 20 minutes to get the game's first try, but for that first 20 minutes, you could see a side that they just looked a bit different, and you couldn't quite put your finger on exactly why. Now they had a bit more direction from Clune being back in there, probably a bit more defensively resilient as well. Wigan weren't great, but even so, you play the team that's in front of you, and Huddersfield, that's a performance from Huddersfield that I'd not seen in a long, long time. One that was as complete as that and as enthusiastic as that. Some of the rugby they were playing was just not like them at all in a good way, because they just looked so confident, whereas they hadn't in the past year, 18 months, whatever. So yeah, I think they're a different proposition now than you would have had going in a month ago. Going up against them this Friday, it's a different side that Leeds will be up against to what we've seen over the past year or so, I guess.
From both yourself and James Dayton as well down at Radio Leeds, were you guys surprised that Luke Robinson went when he did, given that the club had invested in him last year and said, this is, we're sticking by Luke, you come into the new season, whether, it was a tough year, like we say, results-wise, maybe at the end of the season was the opportunity to maybe move on from your head coach at that point. They stuck with him for this year. Were you guys surprised that they didn't go around again knowing, let's just bank this year and roll on? And now they've ended up with Liam Finn. Were you guys surprised that they decided to move on?
I think there's a degree of long-term viewing with it, and I'm not the only person that has said this. I know a fair few other journalists and commentators have had this view as well, is that I think Huddersfield, in making that decision on Luke Robinson, are looking ahead to 2027 and the recruitment cycle that will go through at the end of this year. And I think I think it's quite clear, having made that decision, they didn't see Luke Robinson as the person to take them into the new year. So instead of allowing him to continue in that role, they make the decision early, appoint someone else who can pick up the reins midway through this year, get out of it what they can, but then have full focus on 2027 when it comes to the recruitment and building a squad. I think that's very much what was behind that call. I do feel for Luke Robinson, because again, as
I do,
someone who having dealt with him a fair bit over the past couple of years when he's been in charge, he's been nothing but honest and just a very good person. I think you can see that as well, just in the way that he interacts with his peers and with members of the media as well. He's a very, very nice bloke, which I think is why it's a really sad sort of decision that was made. But ultimately we see this often, don't we, in rugby league and in professional sport in general, that it is business, and they need to make a call that they feel will benefit them as an organisation going forward. And clearly, in their mind, that was to go in a different direction. And like we say, Liam Finn has done really well since he's sort of taken those temporary reins. I'm not sure if he's entirely chucked his hat in the ring to take the job on a permanent basis. And I know that they had quite a lot of applicants for that role, did Huddersfield. And I mean, they've not appointed anyone as of yet, so they're still whittling down, the candidates and finding their preferred options. So we'll see how long that takes and when it arrives. But I think, again, the fact that they have taken as long as they have, which is coming up to sort of 3 weeks or so now, 3-4 weeks, that very much tells me that they are keen to find the right person for the long term, and that the fact they've not rushed into it and they've not made an appointment inside sort of a week or two, I think tells me certainly that their eyes are on 2027 and beyond, as opposed to trying to get someone in to drag them up this season.
It'd be very interesting to see who does take up that role, judging at where the club's sort of been post Paul Anderson, I'd say, looking at, there was a Simon Wolford a couple of years and Ian Watson came in, looked to be sort of pushing the club back up on a bit of an arc. That then ended, and we then got Luke Robinson. But like you said, in regards to Liam Finn, a great result against Wigan, a great result against York last time out. So that was 2 weeks ago. A 34-14 win. They look to be rolling. They look to have, with key players coming back, they really look to be one of those teams that's really challenging. I'm going to say the bottom half of those teams. So, you look at your Casses, your Bradford, your York, your Toulouse. They're starting to pick up results that now brings them totally into the fight. And it's so early in the season, it's a good time to be getting wins, isn't it, if you're a Giants player?
I think so. And I think the Wigan result as well was really telling, because if you look at Super League, and some people have sort of speculated as to, almost splitting it into two mini leagues because of certainly the standards on paper. You almost think there's maybe a top 8, top 9 that are fixed, and then there's a bottom 4 or 5 that will probably be fixed as well. And we are, to an extent, seeing that. There's a few clubs that have broken that mould and got a couple of surprise results. York's opening day win against Hull KR being a big one. I think Huddersfield beating Wigan as well is one of those that, sort of breaks that mould a little bit. But I think this is a big test for Huddersfield coming up against a Leeds side that, again, are pretty confident in what they've been doing, are in good form on the back of those wins here against Warrington. The last game they played against Bradford before that break for the Challenge Cup quarterfinals. These are two sides that are coming in fresh as well. Let's not forget.
Yeah,
neither
absolutely.
side played last weekend. They'll have had that time to just sort of recuperate, refresh, have possibly a bit of a reflection on the first block of games. And how they've been trending, what they think about that opening period, before they go into this next chunk. So yeah, they're both coming in pretty fresh off the back of those games. But as I say, I think this is Huddersfield's toughest test so far, and this will give them a real idea of where they're at. They caught a poor Wigan side unawares. Turned up really well in that game, as we've said, but caught a bad Wigan side on a bad day. Beat a York side that I think we're seeing to struggle a bit now, York, just when it comes to personnel and injuries and having that squad depth without a doubt. And that's the case across a lot of Super League, but I think York are really feeling it. And I think you can see that in the sort of squads that they've been having to name and some of the players that they've been having to pick up from their connection with Newcastle.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of that from York in the past few games. So I think it's starting to bite them. This is going to be Huddersfield's biggest test because they've got a Leeds side that have got that momentum, have got a strong squad, very, very few injuries, and are very much in confident mood now. They've had a couple of surprise results of Leeds. I mean, the Hull FC performance being probably the main one you could pick out as an underperforming afternoon, and Brad Arthur said as much after that game.
Yes.
But since then, that's given them the kick up the backside to change and to sort of regroup and pick up on the things that they do well, and start implementing those. And the Warrington game, the Bradford performance, I think are two games where they've very much shown that. So I think it'll be Huddersfield's biggest test, certainly since they've had this bit of a rejuvenation.
So which players for Huddersfield are going to be the ones that you've earmarked that are really going to impact, if they are to get a win today against, like I said, a very informed Rhino side? Who's going to be top of your list for they need to play top of their game, and then there'll be a chance for a result?
I think there's a good handful in there and in different sort of roles too. I think Adam Clune's a big one. We're going to come on to him in a few moments, I know, and look at his opposite number as well on the Rhinos side. But Clune, I think, has added that bit of direction to Huddersfield. I think he's a really, really key part. And when they got those players back, I think he was the main one. He's their captain after all, and he's their dominant halfback. I think he was one that had a real impact. Looking away from him, Jacob Gagai looks a different player this year.
He does, doesn't he?
I think he looks really good. I think he's really comfortable in that left centre spot. They signed him last year as a fullback. He got the number 1 shirt somewhere that when he played in the NRL, certainly for South Sydney, he was more of a winger centre. In their New South Wales Cup team, he played a bit of fullback, but I just don't think he is a fullback or ever was a fullback, and I think you saw that in his performances last year when he was playing there. Their squad evolved a bit last year in that George Flanagan ended up in that role. Gagai then got shifted out to the winger centre spots where I think he looked more comfortable. But I think the fact he's had a full pre-season training there and just really sort of nailing down one of those 3-quarter spots, doing a lot of his work there with this Huddersfield side, I think has really benefited him, and I think we're seeing that this year as well, because like I say, he looks a different player. That Wigan game, I'm going to keep referring back to just because it's the best I've seen them. It really is. He was breaking tackles, which again we didn't see him do anywhere near enough last year for Huddersfield. He's been breaking tackles.
He's one of their top tackle breakers here, and he's one of the competition's top tackle breakers.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting you bring up that point.
No, he is, and he's got this strength about him this year, and he looks like he's got some intent and knows where he should be in certain moments. And he's got a bit of flair about him, and I think that's always been the case. The Gagai brothers over in Australia have always been like that. Dane as well, who plays for Newcastle, has very much built his game on doing that and trying things on the edge. And Jacob has picked that up clearly as well from his brother, and is really implementing that into his game this year. I think whoever he is. With on that left edge, whoever that combination is, they look really good. Jacob Douglas was his winger in the Wigan game, and those two looked so in sync, despite the fact it's the first time they've ever played together.
Formerly, and Jacob Douglas, obviously former Wigan player as
former
well.
Wigan player on loan from St Helens. Again, I think that's his only game so far. He didn't play in the York match, but he's a great option for them there. And again, that's another example of just players that they're getting back. I think in the forwards as well, Tristan Powell has been a real unsung hero in that forward pack. Came in mid-season last year, found his feet relatively quickly, had to find his feet relatively quickly because he became a key part of that Huddersfield forward pack, almost by necessity because they were down on numbers. All of a sudden he found himself as a default leader, really, because some of those other forwards were injured and he just had to step up. But again, I think he's another one that's benefiting from a full pre-season with the Giants and has really kicked on, got the number 8 shirt, has played, he's been named as a loose forward, and that's how they've operated in the middle this year a lot is Huddersfield. They've had a very, very big pack. Chris Patola has ended up shifting to second row, again by necessity, but has excelled there.
He's no small body either. He's a big guy.
Bang on. So they've been starting with essentially 4 props in their team for most of this year, which has, I think, helped and hindered them at times, depending on the game state and who they've been against. But just back to Tristan Powell, I think he's their top tackler this year as well. Gets to a lot of work in the middle of the field.
For such a big guy, he really throws himself around.
Well, exactly.
It's great to see as a fan.
Exactly, he's a real workhorse of a forward as well. He's probably not your big bopper like a Tom Burgess would be, a Fenton Rogers would be, but he gets through the work and he'll take a hit up every set. Essentially gets through a lot of work defensively as his stats show. So he's a really big one. And Asher O'Donnell is the other one as well that I think has really shown up. A bit of an unknown when they brought him in. People really knew him as, he's Kai O'Donnell's brother, who was great for Lee a couple of years back. And, that's all a lot of people really knew him over him, me included, I'll admit. But came with a good rep.
About him either.
Came with a good rep from Brisbane Tigers over in the Queensland Cup, has arrived and again has made an impact. Has been backed as well. Crucially, was given the number 11 shirt, was put straight into that starting back row spot, and has really shown up. And again, I think he's quite a similar body type to Tristan Powell. Gets through a lot of work, albeit in a different sort of role on that right edge, and looks again like a nice bit of business from Huddersfield. So I think there's the makings of a really good side there. Again, their big problem over the past 18 months has just been naming their best team every single week. They've not had that luxury because they've fallen on so many injuries. Some of them circumstantial, some of them that I think if you looked into their sort of medical department and the work they do, I think they'd admit that there's certain ones they probably could have done better with. And I know Luke Robinson said a few times last year that they were constantly investigating what they could have done better. There were a few sort of soft tissue injuries that were, that cropped up. But I think a lot of it you do have to put down to just bad luck, and that's where they were at. So if they can, keep a full side and keep naming their strongest squad, then I think they can build themselves into a formidable opponent, and they're getting some of those crucial bodies back now. But I think they've got a good handful of key players that are really showing up this season.
The last one, just from when we were talking this week, Niall Evalds, his role and coming back in at fullback. We've talked about, when we talk about young players, and one of those that's really shone for Huddersfield has been George Flanagan. I would say in the last 2 years, maybe that's why Gagai has maybe been pushed into more of a natural centre role because of how good George has been. Obviously, George is now injured, but Niall Evalds has come back from injury. Quite a good moment to re-announce yourself in Super League. And he seems to be one player that if you're going to spark something at Huddersfield, he's going to be the man. His speed, his footwork, he's an absolute speed demon. Without
a doubt. And he was another one in that Wigan game that really excelled. Again, it was his first game back in after a lengthy absence. I think he only managed to play 2 games for the Giants last season when he signed mid-season. from Hull KR. So yeah, he's been waiting for that opportunity for a fair old while, but you can absolutely see the impact he makes as soon as he's reintroduced into that side. He's such a natural fullback. I remember him coming through at Salford, and they tried to, I can't remember who their fullback was at the time. It might have been Luke Patton for a while, but they had a couple of options. But I remember them trying to shoehorn him in there somewhere. Played a bit on the wing, which has never been his natural position.
No.
You know, it's quite strange with some players. You see, some have just got attributes that suit both, and this isn't a knock on Niall Evalds, but he is so much more suited to playing that fullback role, just popping up, knowing where to be, knowing when to inject himself into the attack, and having that, as you say, you know, he's got pace, he's got agility, he just knows where to put himself as well. He's got that wherewithal, and you know, just that rugby brain, I think, to know exactly where he needs to be at exactly the right time. And he's one of the best in Super League for that. That's the reason he was getting, you know, people, you know, calling for him to be England's first choice fullback a few years ago when he was probably at his peak. He's got some work to do, I think, to get back to that level. You know, in part just because he's had so long out since he's joined Huddersfield. You know, he's had months out. You know, he's one of these that he's just finding his feet again and finding his fitness. But you could absolutely tell the difference when he slotted back into that position for Huddersfield, and the difference he makes. But also, I think in defence as well, he's so solid under the high ball. His kick returns are great. He's got a good bit of upper body strength to, you know, hit and stick when it comes to taking those kick returns. He's quite difficult to drive backwards.
He's a bit deceiving, isn't he? Just how strong
he really
is.
is.
He's one of those that looks quite, as I said, quite slender, but actually, like you've said, he just pack a bit and then could run a ball back in, easily bump off a tackle, and then he's away.
Without a doubt. And defensively as well, I think, I don't think it's a coincidence that Huddersfield have looked defensively more sound since he's been back in. And that's not necessarily just because of the tackles that he can make as a fullback when he needs to be called upon. But I think it's a lot of that organisation as well as a fullback. You know, if you ever watch a fullback's game entirely, if you went to a rugby league game, ignored the other 25 players that are on the pitch and just watched a good fullback and see the work they do when it comes to not necessarily running the ball or anything, but just the talking that they do. You know, when they are at the back and they're directing players and they're looking at the splits in front of them, depending on where the ball is being played and how many players need on the left, how many players need on the right. He's got that experience that perhaps a George Flanagan, who is a bit more of a live wire when it comes to attack, Evalds has got the experience that he probably hasn't at the minute.
Yes, agreed.
And I think one of Huddersfield's biggest problems this year might be when those two are both fit and just how you get them both on the side. Because for me, they both need to play.
I asked you this question. I said, if you're going, so say you're going with Evalds, Lolohea, and Clune as your three, where do you fit George Flanagan?
It's a great question, and I honestly I don't know what the exact answer would be. I think the initial reaction would to be have George Flanagan as your bench player, have him as a utility off the bench to just inject a bit of spark if they need it. But I honestly don't know, because he is. It's interesting there's been so much negativity overshadowing Huddersfield in the past year or two, just when it comes to injuries, poor results, and the attendances and everything that's just sort of gone with it, and them as a club. The one big consistent shining light for me has been George Flanagan and just his emergence as a brilliant young professional. Signed him on a deal from Bradford a few years back when he was a prospect there, was just coming through their system, was playing with his dad at Bradford as well. He was doing great things at Keighley now. But they signed him as very much a prospect for the future. And, you know, that decision is starting to bear fruit now and has done in the last year or so. And on the back of those injuries, he's got that chance and looks like a really, really talented player. He's got that flair going forward. He's got an electric step. If they need someone to pop up and do something magic, he's the player to go to, even though he's still only in his early 20s. You know, he's very much come into that side and led from the front, been the player that Huddersfield fans go and enjoy watching, even when everyone else is injured and even when things aren't going great. He has been the standout player. So when he's back fit, he, for me, needs to be in their 17. But where do you put him? For me, your natural answer is probably as the bench utility and coming off the bench to, as I say, just inject a bit of something. But I don't know. I really don't know, because, again, the other argument is you probably need him on the pitch all the time. So where he slots in, I do not know.
So Niall Evalds goes back out onto the wing.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, we're not putting Niall Evalds on the wing. We're not putting Niall Evalds on the wing.
Okay. Now, Jack, we're looking at our head-to-head. We've picked you've given a little bit of a preview away already for what we've gone for. The two number 7s for both teams today, Jake Connor and Adam Clune, both big influential players in regards to how their team plays, in regards to, I would say, the final scores on most of the occasions. Jake goes back to the ACCU Stadium, taking on his former club, who played a handful of times for across a number of years, came through in their academy. He gets an opportunity to, I guess, continue what has been a very good season, but not a headline-grabbing season. Do you think that works for Jake Connor?
I do. I really do. I don't think it's a bad thing that pressure and that spotlight is sometimes taken off him. I think he creates that himself by the performances he puts out there. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if he, is just going about his work in a slightly quieter way. He's always going to be that same player, isn't he? I think so. There'll always be a bit of noise around Jake Connor, regardless of what he's doing, just because of the nature of the guy. But no, I don't think it's a bad thing. On both of them, on Connor and Clune, the most pivotal parts of each side's attack for me. They really are. They are the leaders. They are the key lead halfback for both sides respectively. I think you see that when Jake Connor isn't there. I think when he doesn't play, I think that shouts most about what he does bring when he is in. When we've seen him be absent in a couple of games this season, and we've seen that responsibility fall onto the shoulders of Brodie Croft and young George Brown coming through, while they've done what they can, I think you do see the absence of Jake Connor there. I think it becomes quite evident when it comes to kicking game, and getting that long boot on it as he does. When it comes to taking the ball to the line in the way that he does, I've said it before. I think he is the best example of a player that digs so deep into the line, goes right into the jaws of the defence before releasing the ball, and that is so crucial, particularly to that attacking left edge of the Rhinos, that has been so fruitful in 2026 so far. That's why Mike Aceva's got as many tries as he has, in part, I think. For me, they are both the real key links in that chain of attack. Clune, very similar. The fact that he's come back in to the Giants setup in these last two games for them, in the Wigan game, in the York game, I think you can immediately tell the difference. He just gives them a bit of direction. He just straightens everything up. And I think it also benefits, and I think this is the same with Connor. It's quite interesting because they are different players individually, but what they bring to each side is quite similar, I think, in that when they play, they take a bit of pressure off their halfback partner. When Connor plays, it allows Brodie Croft to just play his natural game, which is to be a bit more of a runner. He's got that wicked right foot step that he can put on, and has shown that he can score tries and make breaks from that in the past for Leeds. It takes the pressure off him and just allows him to play freely. When Connor's not there, he shoulders a bit more of that responsibility to be the leader, to be the one directing traffic and organising players and stuff, which isn't his natural game. So when Connor is there, it lets Croft play more freely. When Clune is there for Huddersfield, it allows the same for Lolohea. Now, Tui Lolohea is not an organising halfback. He's a eyes up, plays what he sees type of play. He picks it up. He will challenge the line and just try and take it on with his footwork. That's just the game that he plays, and he showed the same when he was at the Rhinos and when he was at Salford as well. It's why he can slot in at fullback if he needs to, because he just has that off the cuff style game where he chimes into the line, pops up where he wants, and just has a bit more of a freer role to try and just take on areas of weakness in the opposition defence. That's just the way he plays. When Adam Clune's been absent, again, the responsibility has fallen on his shoulders to do a bit of that organising, to take the pressure away from other players, from a young George Flanagan or whoever is slotting into the other halfback role for Huddersfield. He shoulders that responsibility, and that's been evident as well, I think. So Clune being back in there as that organised head, that experienced head, the captain as well of Huddersfield,
Of course.
I think really does change the dynamic of their attack, as Connor does with Leeds. So yeah, it's part of the reason when we come up with these sort of head-to-heads each week, we look at the sort of crucial players for each. And for me, those two are so pivotal to their respective attacks that if they weren't in there, you'd be looking at a completely different game. I think just those two players being involved tonight, just those two out of the 26 players that will be on the field at any one given time, change the entire complexion of the game, and that's what I think is so crucial about Clune and Connor.
And don't get us wrong, there's plenty of playmakers across both teams as individuals. Whether you're looking at your Lockie Millers, your Adam Swift, who's come back in recent weeks, but these guys lay the foundations. They produce the points. Looking at Clune, he's got 2 tries this season, a handful of assists, but he's touched the ball more than any other Huddersfield player in the last 2 weeks. He's been in the top 3 ball carriers in both wins. Now, I don't think that's just a matter of fact. That is because he's coming back, because he's, like you said, he's shouldering more responsibility. He's actually putting Huddersfield's attack on his shoulders, and he's giving you Evalds, he's giving you Lola Hayes that opportunity to try to do something. And we've seen it last year with Jake Connor. He does exactly the same thing when he's in a lead shirt, whether it's with Brodie Croft beside him, whether it's now nurturing George Brown's talent. And as both teams getting those rewards, it's a real interesting battle to where they're going to end up with who goes on the winning side, who goes on the losing side, because one of those guys is going to decide that.
And I think it's really interesting as well that for me, Clune has always been the general, the game dictator. He'll decide the tempo at which Huddersfield play. He'll calm them down if they need it. As you say, everything goes through him. Whereas I think Connor, throughout his career, has almost played the backup role a little bit. He's played the Croft role or the Lola Hay role in this sense of being the supporting halfback, of playing what he sees. And I think there's degrees of, and it comes back to, like I said a minute ago, they are different players individually, but what they bring to each team is similar. Individually, Jake Connor is still more of a maverick, without a shadow of a doubt. He's not necessarily the general that Clune is, but at the same time, he does still dictate that Rhinos attack, and he's quite clear the preferred half when it comes to being first receiver, when it comes to deciding which way the play is going to go, when it comes to, very much allowing Croft to play off the back of what he does. And I think you see that week in, week out. And yeah, like I say, it's quite interesting that wasn't initially Jake Connor's natural game. He was the fullback into the halfback that would just pop up and play what he saw. Whereas now his game has adapted where he is now the one taking charge when it comes to kicks and booting it long and deciding what they do, Leeds. And he's still got that, as I say, that bit of maverick about him where he will just play what he sees, and if something's on, he'll try and kick a 40-20. That one he did at Bradford, for example,
that wasn't
which
a
was
40-20.
Absolutely fantastic. It was a 20-20.
It was an 8-10.
Oh, it was a fantastic kick. It was ridiculous. And as well, the way that he sort of did it from a standing start across his body, it was so perfectly timed. And those are the kind of aspects that he's got in his game that he can just pull a rabbit out of a hat from anywhere. Clune is not the same player. He's much more about tempo and about structure and about implementing a game plan. And that's the key difference, I think, between the individuals. But they do still bring very similar energies when it comes to just reaffirming and relaxing the rest of the squad, letting everyone else do their jobs as opposed to trying to make up for the absence of those two number sevens.
And I think absolutely, when you look at how good Mike Acevo has been this year, in terms you've said about his try scoring efforts, I don't think that comes solely, but I think there's a bit of that's on him. But I also think Jake Connor plays. We saw it in Vegas, not to keep Archers back to Vegas, but we saw that out there as well. Speaking about players such as Adam Clune who've come back from injury in recent weeks, Huddersfield have been buoyed. We've just got the teams dropping up below us now. Huddersfield have been buoyed by 2 more arrivals from injury themselves. Let's just start with Leeds, though. The one change for them this week, Brad Arthur once again going pretty much with the exact same team he has for the last 3 or 4 rounds. Harry Newman obviously dropped out with his loan move to Hull for the week, and then Tom Nicholson-Watton comes in. Just a note from yourself on seeing that Harry move. What do you think about the whole affair about him going to sort of Hull for the week?
I think it caught a lot of people out, and I don't think many people expected it. But I think if you look into the logic of that move, it does make sense. I think we've seen naturally in the last couple of games that Jack Bird is the first choice right centre, and his performances have backed that up. He got given that opportunity by Brad Arthur on the back of the Hull game. where no one really covered themselves in much glory. Bird then got installed into that right centre position for the Warrington match, played really well, was outstanding in that game, both defensively and in attack. Did similar again against Bradford. And I think that is very much his position to lose now. I think if you're looking at a first choice, three-quarter line for Leeds, it is Hall, Bird, Hanley and Sevo. I think that is merited on performance as well. They all deserve those shirts. And Newman, just on this occasion, is unfortunately the odd one out, and that's where he's found himself. And I think with a player like Harry Newman, who is so used to playing Super League week in, week out, is clearly a top standard athlete, he needs to be playing Super League week in, week out still. And I don't think it does him any good just sitting in the lead system behind those four players, sitting as 18th or 19th man, still being involved day to day, but not getting that competitive outlet on a weekend. So I think...
But he's not going to drop down to the reserves either. When you look at our team as well, there'll be a few of those lads who'll play for reserves tomorrow night. Actually, you're not going to do that with Harry Newman, are you?
No, I agree. And I think the way that has been approached is very similar to when Mike Acevo was coming back in. The way that was approached by Brad Arthur, saying that he didn't think he'd get much out of a reserves game, hence why he threw him straight into Super League. I think Newman is at a similar level where he wouldn't get much out of the reserves, so you're better off putting him into a different competitive environment, still in a Super League side, like Hull, who are desperate for a right centre, given, again, they've got loads of injuries too. Yes. So he'll go in there on a short, it's initially a 1 week loan deal, so we'll see how he goes, and whatever happens, there's always the option there for Leeds to bring him back into the fold. Whether that turns to a longer loan or not, again, remains to be seen. But I don't think it does anyone any damage to allow Newman to go out to a side that aren't a direct rival of Leeds either. At the minute, it's worth saying, with Hull's performances this season and where they've sort of been at, you wouldn't call it turmoil that they're in at all, but there's a degree of unsettlement there, just given everything going around John Cartwright as well at present. So you'd probably say that they're not a direct rival of the Rhinos either at the minute. So I think it's probably a move that works for all parties in the short term. It keeps Harry Newman match fit. If he needs to be called back in to the Rhinos side, say there's an injury in that three-quarter line, then he can be. Hull benefit from getting an England international that they can bring in and drop into that centre spot. And, Leeds have got a squad that is so competitive at the minute and has that depth. You look at other players that have been missing out, Ethan O'Neill, Jeremiah Matautia, Presley Cassell, haven't been getting as much of a look in the 17 just simply because of how everyone else is playing. And Harry Newman is just a victim of everyone else's good form, I guess. And
also he'll go to Hull, a place that he also knows a handful of players. When you look at, look down their team sheet, Aidan Caesar, former Leeds player, Zach Hardacre, who played with here, Sam Lazzoni, obviously has gone there. So
Tom Briscoe, chuck him in there.
Tom Briscoe, absolutely. So it's not an unfamiliar environment, I would say. At the same time, Huddersfield, Harry Rushton and Sam Halsall coming back in. Two very big inclusions when you're looking at it's Jacob Alger and I know Connor Wrench. You spoke before about how you've been impressed about how since he rejoined the Giants, but Halsall has a little bit more experience. Has that now for the try line. Well, it's almost a like for like split, isn't it? Having both him and Rushton, who spent a good time in the NRL, and another Wigan product, both of them as well, coming back into the side.
Yeah, I think Halsall, he's been such a frustrating player in the past few years because he's just not been able to get that proper consistent run. He's always had injuries that have just sort of knocked him back ever so slightly, because for me he's so talented as a physical presence, as an athlete as well. He's got all the attributes that you'd want from an outside back. He's rangy, he's fantastic in the air. When he did have a bit of a run in their side last season, he was their main outlet for kicks on the last tackle because he gets up really well and competes really well in the air. So he's really good for that. I think what will be interesting is to see where he plays, whether it's centre or wing. Huddersfield have now, to a lesser extent probably, but got a similar dilemma to what the Rhinos have, in that they've got a 21 there of players that are all viable options. Yeah. They really are. There's probably one or two that you'd pick out that will miss out, but there's probably a group of about 19 there that genuinely any of them can play, and it's really tough to see who to leave out, and that is probably their biggest dilemma now. It's the opposite.
It's a nice dilemma if you leave in.
It is. There was a point earlier this season, a few weeks back, where they were calling up 3 lads from the academy. and giving 3 lads that probably weren't ready for Super League debuts, just because that is what they had to do. The Rhinos loaned them 3 players for the Bradford game. We saw that. They were really in dire straits when it came to squad selection. Whereas now they've got numbers back, they've got players back, and the biggest struggle for Liam Finn this week will be who misses out. As we say, a good problem to have. But yeah, Halsall is a big in. Whether or not he plays centre or wing, we'll have to see. I think he'll play centre.
Depends, because you've got Adam Swift come back in, and he'll obviously partner Jacob Gagai. But Tanguy Zenon's played
He's played brilliant.
Pretty damn well since coming back in from Halifax.
I mean, the other options, they've got Tane Milne, who they've used as a bit of a hybrid back rower at times as well, last season and in a couple of games this year. So he's an option there. Jacob Douglas, who's on loan from St Helens still, played really well in the Wigan game, didn't play against York, but again, a great option on the wing. So there's players there. Zenon, as you mentioned as well, who's been really impressive since joining from Halifax. So they've got a lot of options there. Harry Rushton being the other player that comes back in of those 2 changes. Another player that probably just needs a run of games. He's been given a leadership role in that Huddersfield team this year. He's their vice captain, and Clune being the captain, as we've mentioned. So that's clearly a bit of a show of responsibility and trust in him. Initially from Luke Robinson when he was there, but those sorts of decisions tend to come from an entire coaching staff, not just one man. So they clearly rate him highly, not only as a player but also as a leader in that group. And I think that's absolutely correct, because when he has played, he has shown up, whether that's in the middle or whether that's on an edge. He gives them that option. I think he's another player that is nowhere near his peak yet. He shows so much promise as a ball carrier, as a ball runner, as a defender too. So I think he's a really big inclusion. But again, another one of those that they just need to hope and pray stays fit.
Yes.
And there's a good handful of players in that Giants side that you can say that about. Is they just need them to simply stay on the field and be able to play, because that is what's hampered them so much in the past 18 months. So they've got players back, and that is a crucial bit for them. Keeping them fit is now the next step. But certainly, if you're looking as short term as just tonight's game, that is a strong squad that they've got to pick from, without a doubt.
And those dilemmas will be resolved very shortly, with team news coming very shortly. Just notes on where, if you haven't got your ticket for tonight's game at the ACCU Stadium, tickets are still available. You can buy them on the away turnstiles. But just if you're out and about, or you wanted to make sure you can watch it wherever you are, Sky Sports has the game live and direct. It's on the Plus channel, so channel 404 for you to watch that one, and you can see all the action, all the build-up live. If you're out and about and need and you prefer the audio options, our great friend at BBC Radio Leeds, the one-stop shop. Jack, you've got JD down there, I believe?
Yeah, James Dayton and Barry Eaton are our commentary team down there. Full build-up and commentary of that game starting at 7 for the 8 o'clock kickoff, of course. So yeah, on all BBC Radio Leeds frequencies, and also on BBC Sound as well, online worldwide.
There you go. That's one place to listen. Also, keep in touch with us at LEEDS RHINOS across X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Make sure that you can keep in touch with all the post-match reaction, all the reaction from Brad and all the players, regardless of the result. But we're hoping the Rhinos can get the win. My thanks to Jack Conlon as always. I've been Dan Hawkhead, and team news is coming next.